Shalom, shalom. I have a question for my brothers and sisters within Christianity. We speak of Isaiah chapter 7 containing the prophecy that speaks of the Messiah, the sign of the virgin birth, and that this prophecy is speaking of Jesus of Nazareth. But let's look into it closely and see just who is it really speaking to, and is it really speaking about Jesus of Nazareth? Now, I want to share a quick summary about chapter 7 of Isaiah. This is really starting off talking about two nations that is coming against Jerusalem. Two nations coming against Jerusalem. And King Ahaz is pretty disturbed about it. The people's disturbed about it. And God sends the prophet to Ahaz and asks him for a sign. He's asking Ahaz, King Ahaz, for a sign. So let's get to verse 10 where this all takes place. Moreover, Yah spake again unto Ahaz, saying, Ask thee a sign of Yah thy God. Ask it neither in the depths or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt Yah. And he said, Hear ye now, O house of David. Is it a small thing for you to weary men? But will ye weary my God also? Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Who is the you here that is supposed to see this sign? That's something you have to remember and ask yourself. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse evil and to choose the good. For before the child shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land that thou abhorrest shall be forsaken of both her kings. So we see that God is using the birth of this child that King Ahaz must know about and see and witness, that before this child get to a certain age, these two kings will be destroyed, and that King Ahaz and Jerusalem will not have to worry any longer. The birth of this child is like setting a timetable. It's like the start of the clock, or watching God move in their midst. That's why they speak of Emmanuel. You shall know by the birth of this child, and using this child as a gauge, that God is indeed with you. This is what this prophecy is about. This prophecy is not about the coming of Yeshua. It's not about the coming of any Christ. It is a sign for King Ahaz to see. It's a sign for him, God said. So if this is referring to Jesus, was King Ahaz around to see Jesus be born? Was he around to witness his childhood before he got to a certain age. And around that time, were there two kingdoms coming against Jerusalem? Now, this is what this is talking about. So how can we take this text and make it mean something else? Who was the sign for? Did the person that this sign was for, did they see Jesus born? I wait. Were there two kingdoms, two kings coming against Jerusalem at the time of Jesus' birth? And did these kings have any of these names mentioned here as Rezin, and Pekah? Ask yourself that. Do we see them names in the Gospels? Do you see any mention of these items? Because that's the whole scope of this. For King Ahaz and Jerusalem not to worry about these two kings coming against them. And that God will have a child be born that you could use as a gauge to know that God is with you, Emmanuel. You should know that by the birth of this child and using this child as a gauge, and when you see the hand of God move, you will know that God is with you. Not that this child is God with you. This was not a prophecy for King Ahaz, a sign for him that he would not get to see because it happened by 800 years later. Was King Ahaz around to see Jesus' birth and to watch him as a young child before he could tell the difference of good and evil, to know to refuse evil and to choose good, and that he would eat honey? Ask yourself that. Because we cannot take a piece out and say it's a prophecy and leave everything else out because we know it don't fit. We have to read things in context. 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 Not take a piece out and make it mean whatever we want it to mean and then say it's a prophecy. Because we can see once we read it in context, that notion that this is a prophetic word pointing to Yeshua, we will see that that's error. And just because they quote it in the Gospels, don't make it a prophecy about Yeshua. Because once we read it in the Gospels and immediately go to the source behind it, we can see that this was not a prophecy that the Most High prophesied almost, it's just a rough number, almost 1,000 years ago that this was referring to Yeshua. Because we can see that it wasn't. So yes, remember to read things in context. Let's remember not to use our sanctified imaginations and make a text say something that it is not saying. The text is not talking about the birth of Messiah. The verse is not speaking of a prophecy about Jesus of Nazareth. It's not. Because if it is, you have to admit that King Ahaz was around to see Jesus born, because the sign was for King Ahaz, for his eyes. So ask yourself the question: was King Ahaz around at the birth of Jesus of Nazareth? Was two kingdoms, two kings making war with Jerusalem at the time of Jesus of Nazareth when he was a young child? You got to ask yourself these questions. Because we can't handpick little items and make it say what we want it to say. If that's not what the Most High was talking about when he uttered it through the mouth of the prophet, how can we make it say it now when that's not what it was talking about then and say, well, this is what it means over here? That is taking a text and making it mean what you want it to mean. But once you go back and look at it, at the original source of it, you can plainly see it's not talking about Jesus of Nazareth. It's not. So you just be truthful about it. This is not a messianic prophecy. It's pointing to Jesus of Nazareth. Not meaning to hurt anyone or offend them. But this, Isaiah chapter 7, cannot be used as a proof text, as a messianic prophecy that somehow is pointing to Jesus of Nazareth as Emmanuel, God with us. Shalom.